you everyone for joining today's webinar. We'll be exploring the SAP BPC roadmap for 2026, looking at end of maintenance deadlines, impacts this will have on users, and your options going forwards. So if I give a quick overview of the agenda, firstly, I'll give an introduction to our speaker, then we'll share an overview of the BPC roadmap, look at the impacts on current BPC users, and finally explore some of the paths open to you, including BPC support or migration to an alternative solution. So I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for today. Simon Bell has over 30 years experience in the EPM space and is Managing Director of SAP BPC. He founded OpenWave Solutions, which he established in 2008 and built into a leading SAP-focused EPM consultancy. Following its acquisition by Sapphire Systems in 2023, Simon continued to lead and advise the business, developing packaged planning and consolidation capabilities that were deployed to more than 30 customers over an 18-month period. He began his career as an accountant, specializing in statistically derived planning models, before moving into a consulting role at Hyperion and later leading the European division of BPM Partners. During his career, Simon has supported organizations including IKEA, Sony PlayStation, AGCO, and Moët Hennessy in achieving their performance management goals. So today, Simon leads SAP BPC with former OpenWave colleague Sham Khan, helping organizations across Europe and the United States navigate the next stage of their EPM journey. So Simon, thank you. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Carrie, and good to see everyone here. So as Carrie said, we'll be talking through some issues around the BPC end of maintenance, and we'll get to things like the actual dates and consequences of those things very shortly. But just starting off, I think we can talk a little bit about the SAP strategic view on BPC. And to be fair, BPC's been a bit of a poor relationship in the SAP portfolio for a good long period now. When they acquired the OutlookSoft organization back in 2007, when in fact the whole market consolidated that year with Oracle's acquisitions and IBM's acquisitions, bring really all of the major players at that time under those three brands. It almost felt like a Me Too acquisition, and certainly the experience over the years following that demonstrated that SAP wasn't ever actually that comfortable with BPC, and their organization didn't really understand it. But as they've moved forward with their overall move to become the cloud organization, as they like to badge themselves now, BPC really no longer fits with any type of strategic portfolio place in where SAP sees things. So what SAP have got is effectively a view that it's not a product that aligns with what they're doing, and certainly with the development of SAC and the addition of group reporting into the S4 product line, it doesn't actually have a place anymore in the strategy. They used to position BPC as a unified solution alternative to group reporting and SAC, but even that's drifted away from their perspective. So today, that's not even an angle that they would promote for BPC, and the consequences of that really are visible to everybody who's been observing the product or using the product over a long time. There's been no additional development into the BPC at all. The claimed developments that went into the solution were really around, and this goes back quite a few years since any of those things really materialized, with the integrations to SAC, so that ability to export model content and interact with BPC from the SAC client. And of course, when you look at the SAP roadmap viewer, you'll see that SAC features in pretty much every single development attributed to BPC for maybe as long as 7 or 8 years. And then that is compounded by really just a general lack of appreciation of what BPC was delivering to customers in that broader SAP business. Now, clearly, they do have pockets of capability. There's certain groups who had a focus on the product line. But in the broader organization, the sales organizations, support organizations, there's always been that lack of clarity as to what BPC is for. And as a consequence, going back many years, SAP have always relied on their partner community, and that community of actually specialist partners, of which there's really few left now to support them in both selling and supporting and deploying BPC. So those kind of background awarenesses really help us understand where SAP have got to and where they've actually driven their thought process in terms of the maintenance and the life of the product. And clearly, there is no future in this product. It is end of life. And at that point, we start thinking about, well, what does that mean in a practical sense in terms of dates and the actual specific releases of BPC. This is a matrix which I've been presenting in some of these webinars relating to the BPC roadmap. I think probably going back about 8 years now since I did my first webinar on this topic. And I've been talking to a lot of customers in that time about where they go. And if we go back in time, obviously the Microsoft version has had pretty much zero development since 2007. But finally is end of maintenance this June. That end of maintenance date has been pushed back several times over the years. That really is end of life. There is nothing going on and no future for that version whatsoever. We know of very few customers remaining on it, and that incentive that allowed that did drive SAP to extending that maintenance deadline has really drifted away. And I think if there are any organisations still using the Microsoft version, that they are in trouble. There's the last couple of organisations that we are working with that are really just coming out the tail end of processes to replace it, and that really concludes that. But if we think into the NetWeaver versions and the BW4 versions, you've got that again fairly imminent end of maintenance. So we think about all of the current releases of BPC, that's the 10.1 NetWeaver and optimized versions, and even the BPC BW4 version on 2021 release. Their maintenance dates are all end of December 2027. There is that NetWeaver optional extended maintenance, so that goes in line with NetWeaver and DCC, where it's possible to extend maintenance to 2030. That is actually at an incremental cost that in reality would be a fairly poor option. There's certainly, I would say, more attractive options if extended maintenance were needed, and that potentially addresses both ECC and BPC in that sense. Gartner published a briefing on some thoughts on that not so long ago, but fundamentally extending maintenance for BPC with SAP would probably not be the most optimal scenario. We can certainly talk about alternate options if anyone is interested in that. But in reality, 2027 is a couple of not quite 2 years away as an end of maintenance date. So there is still time to consider what to do there. We've got a similar scenario with current releases of BW4 version of BPC. Obviously, that does have some roadmap. We've got the 2025 release anticipated, and that has an extended maintenance window, obviously in line with the BW4. So we're not going to be seeing that dropping off maintenance immediately. We do reference statements made by SAP that BW4 applications will be maintained until at least 2040. It was interesting, though, that the commitment has clearly not been extended to BPC for those for the evidence of that, there was a specific reference in the SAP note reference there that disclaimed that claim, that commitment for BPC, and said that for BPC, that commitment was very much undecided by senior management in SAP. I've read that to mean that it's not a commitment at all, and really, as far as I can see, and as far as our analysis tells us, that 2025 release is the last release of BPC for BW4, which does put us in line for probably, I think it's about December 2030 is the BW4 maintenance end of for 2025 release. So we are on for all versions of BPC now a deadline for maintenance. Obviously, that last one gets a little bit longer. So with those kind of date targets, deadlines in mind, we start to think about, well, what does that mean for users? But I think there's a question that actually arises before then. I always show this table, and people ask questions about this table in terms of the dates for some very good reasons. And those are, when talking to SAP directly, this is not always clear at all. And I was very interested to read a SAP Insider article from the tail end of last year that was surveying BPC users. And there were some really stark points in that. It's not a bad read. It's worth, if you want to see what the state of understanding of the BPC end of maintenance is. But this is a survey of SAP users. So these are predominantly NetWeaver and BW4 users of origin, as opposed to the Microsoft users who pretty much all evolved from the original Outlook Soft days, and in a lot of cases didn't really have any other SAP landscape, or in many cases didn't have any other SAP landscape. But there were some really quite shocking statistics in there. So the most concerning there was that well over a third didn't even know that the maintenance of their software was imminent. That was compounded a little bit by nearly a third of them also not even being aware of which version of BPC they were on, which does raise concerns in terms of being able to plan for things. And I think those two statistics really drive that final one, with only 11% of users as of last September in this survey being fully prepared for what they need to do, which I would expect is certainly not the case in all former OpenWave customers and customers we've been speaking to, because obviously we've been in that process of conversation. But it does raise a challenge, I guess, for a significant part of the market who may be heading in a direction that's going to cause them some emergency activities in the potentially not too distant future. And that potentially also has implications for other users, because if there's a scramble at a certain point in time, maybe the end of 2027, to address some of these issues, that's going to put pressure, which I think, based on some of the survey or some of the analysis that we've done, things are going to make some of the challenges that we've been seeing, that we've been being told by our customers that they're facing, is going to be compounded. So, quick poll. We thought it would be very helpful to think about what that might mean for the users of BPC who are on this call. So I think we've got a poll up on the screen now, which hopefully we'll be able to do some analysis of as we go. So I'll give that maybe a minute. But really, I think that top point, if you're still on the Microsoft version, you might want to have some very urgent conversations with us. But if you are a NetWeaver or BW4 user, I'd be really interested in state of where we are. So seeing those results, There's a very interesting mix there. I think the majority of the users that we've got on the call today are BW4 users. Of our NetWeaver users, I think every one of them is currently in a process of evaluating what to do, which is probably not a great shock. And it's encouraging to see that we haven't got any NetWeaver users in there who are not prepared at all. And certainly we're having a number of conversations over what people need to do. Clearly, also, when we think about the BW4, because we have a longer timeline to deal with that, we can see we've got a greater number where we have no plans yet. But again, a significant number already in process or thinking about things, which is again an encouraging state of play. So, and as SAP BCS, as part of the Concentric group, have been looking at the users and the business and customers that we've got, and really over the last 12 months or so, been talking to a good number of users across the different versions, and really not hugely dissimilar. I think we've got on this call, we've got a greater proportion of the BW users looking at putting plans in place now, but not there ready yet. Obviously, we do have a number of NetWeaver users who have no plans yet, and that's maybe a factor of us talking to a broader population and those users maybe not being quite so interested in or appreciating the challenge that they may have. But we are working with a couple of organisations at the moment who are in their final stages of migrating away. So, and that's UK and in mainland Europe as well. So we have one on a quite tight deadline, but hopefully we'll make that before the actual end of maintenance. So yeah, not massively dissimilar with those minor differentials. I think pretty much focused on the group with the NetWeaver heads in the sand, I'll call them. So that's based on conversations with organisations who have BPC of different versions and understanding their motivations. And of course, that's really one of the things that we start to think about. What is it that would drive a user beyond simply the end of maintenance, which of course in itself is a critical factor, but what really is driving users to migrate, or what are the concerns with their BPC, not necessarily driving the migration, but driving the stress levels and causing them those operational issues that they wouldn't have. And clearly that SAP maintenance as a factor is very significant. And that SAP support actually spans more than just the end of maintenance. It also looks at addressing the consequences of SAP's support service itself, just not having a focus on BPC. And that's been a problem for a long time. We know, for example, that if we are talking to the SAP support desk, the possibility of talking to an individual with BPC understanding is very, very low. There remains today a very small capability out in the Far East that does the maintenance support for BPC. And ultimately, that's where questions end up, if they end up in the SAP support system. But it can take a very long time to get any BPC question resolved through SAP support. And of course, these are the percentages we see here are the proportion of users who've rated these as challenges at a practical level in their businesses. We've been talking to them over the last year or so. And we do see a couple of perennial complaints in there from BPC use. Performance with BPC is one of those questions that raises itself in very regularly when talking to, I'll call it, from my perspective, new users or new relationships with BPC users, and that's partly driven by the fundamental architecture of BPC. We've got that cloud-based core solution, but all of the interfacing and the reporting is predominantly done through Excel. And of course, that communication between the server and Excel is often guilty of significant performance impacts. And when we're talking about even 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes delays in being able to open and refresh a report, that's a significant amount of time in both a user's perception, but also when we add it up over many reports being run and many users in many businesses, that adds up to a lot of time lost in business. But you go to those extreme ends, and those users in international scenarios, for example, where latency starts really affecting performance, we still hear and see people with reports that can take tens of minutes to open, which is not an attractive place to be. And of course, the other side of that is the well-known issues around MDX and other components of report and logic writing that we see. And a lot of users still complain about that. And of course, there's very few people remaining out in the market who are specializing in supporting people and helping them through those issues. And we've seen, obviously, Opal Wave, which was one of the leading BPC consulting organizations globally, doesn't exist anymore. Our old people are now scattered around in different organizations. And as a consequence of that and other partners drifting away, so the UK partner base with specialisms in BPC is practically gone. Internationally, there are very few left as well. So we find that the partner support is very much diminished and is now materializing in different places. And of course, that's leaving the install base in a more challenged position. And of course, that means even renewal of those partner support agreements is resulting in both a logistical and a practical challenge. And the specialist capabilities are diminishing day by day. We see BPC consultants migrating away to other newer technologies at an individual personal level, and we see nobody investing in new BPC training programs to bring new capability into the market and support. And that is definitely being felt by the customers, and many customers have referenced that fear, lack of support, that reduction in quality of support that they're getting as an issue. And that obviously, I think, chimes with that then challenge that people are facing with that ability to recruit. So, if you're in a situation, and I know a number of people who are in that situation where you have a gap in the team and you need to recruit to fill it, finding someone with BPC experience and expertise, which was always difficult, is now very, very much more difficult. Occasionally there's people available, but very rarely. And they tend to be either moving on in seniority themselves and therefore not looking for those roles necessarily that would be supporting applications, which is obviously that gap in the capability that we see from the partner position as well. So at a practical level, what that means is our BPC is becoming harder and harder to support as we go forward. So not only are we losing that maintenance and we're losing that support from SAP that was never great in the first instance, but that support where we could get it is diminishing in both capacity and quality. And certainly there is no one building new capabilities to fill that gap for the future. So those things were significant challenges for people. And I think, strangely enough, the functionality side of things, maybe that's not strange at all. BPC has always been a robust and competent product at what it's done. You maybe see the dashboarding and presentation side of it is quite a low percentage. That's always been one of the big gaps in BPC's armory, I guess, with Excel being the client of choice and its own web client being pretty much non-functional at all. People have turned to things like Power BI and other BI tools to allow themselves that presentation layer. But of course, there is a technical integration process to even enable that. The BPC has never lent itself to making data accessible very easily. And of course, in that SAP world, access to BPC data through a non-BPC client or through a non-SAP client does raise a risk of that third-party application issue, which can easily result in a licensing challenge, which is obviously a concern if you have gone down that route. But from a functional perspective, generically we see some lack of functionalities, and that's really focused around those features that we're seeing in the latest generation of EPM technologies around the AI, the machine learning assistance, and at times the extension out to additional areas and things which broaden our EPM capabilities. But certainly, if we think about AI, there is no AI in BPC. Although, being fair, the use cases in CPM of AI are all immature and not proved well in a practical sense yet. Anyway, there's some very interesting things coming along, especially as we start to think about anomaly detection. And some of those practicalities around data the AI tools are providing a lot of assistance with. And there's also been some steps forward in automation of generation of content and output, which has moved on to an extent, I would say, not quite there to really support full productive use yet, but certainly growing. But the one functionality point that really stands out is that lack of integration. So obviously the BPC data manager gives a certain degree of integration, but natively it is about any connectivity itself is really restricted to components that are delivered, if we're in the SAP world, through the source systems more than BPC itself. But fundamentally, if we're talking about BPC, its integration capabilities okay when we get into the BPC engine itself in terms of mappings and transformations, but all access to the source systems is really outsourced to technical solutions of people building it themselves or getting third parties in to build those integration steps themselves. We don't get that, what we'd call a genuine integration engine capability. And I think data management is one of those things which is really top of the priority list for a lot of organizations, simply because it's the area where we can have the biggest impact on effort and efficiency, and it's the area where we can have that where we can take most of the manual effort out of our processes and deliver that biggest of improvement for businesses. And it's not surprising to see, therefore, that one really creeping up to the top of the list of challenges on that kind of functional side of things. I mean, if we consider the core capabilities, consolidation and planning processes, those generically stack up very well in the ability to operate at a logical level. So it's interesting to see that list. It's an analysis that we've done based on conversations. It's not survey, it's taking a look at conversations that we've had over the last year with different users and effectively allocating the concerns that those users have expressed in their own scenarios. But does give I think a very representative insight into where business challenges are with their BPC today. So we then think about well, what are the options that we may need to do if we are today operating BPC? And we really do have three options. I've used this particular slide historically. It doesn't change because fundamentally it gives us three potential outcomes. We can continue to use BPC, or we can migrate to a new solution. And that new solution is either going to be an SAP solution or it's going to be a third-party solution. And if we think about those three options, we'll call that remaining on BPC either for a short or more extended period of time as sweating the asset. There's plenty of reasons why we may not be able to move at present. Businesses have priorities. We're working with one organisation whose ERP is going out of maintenance at the end of this year, and that has become their top priority. So, it's not just a case of considering our BPC or EPM capabilities in isolation of the rest of the organisation and priorities in the rest of the organisation. We can't always trump them. The fact is that there are limited resources in a business to address things, so we may be forced into that situation. We've had conversations with people who've simply said, well, we've spent all this money in BPC. We're going to use it for as long as we can. We don't want to invest in anything new. We don't want to invest in BPC, but we want to just keep it alive for as long as we can keep it alive. Now, clearly, then we start getting into those conversations around our governance processes and the ability to continue using out of maintenance software and things like that. So there are governance factors that do influence some of those conversations as well. But really, short of that, my business has no capacity or ability to move forward because of other priorities, etc. And that's pretty much the only scenario we'd see. Certainly for the NetWeaver version. If we're BW4 version, we've maybe got a little bit longer to think about that. But we should be considering where that does leave us, even with the BW4 version, given our realistic end of maintenance is now only 2030, and we'd certainly have concerns over anyone believing it's going to be longer than that now. So we then come down to the alternative options. Obviously, when we are sat as an SAP customer talking to an SAP salesperson, the answer is often simply SAC. It's interesting that SAC seems to be the answer that most SAP salespeople are coming to as their first response, because a lot of BPCs are consolidation users, and there's plenty of consolidation point solutions in the portfolio of users, and clearly the obvious answer to that is S4 group reporting. But of course, that's only a practical option. It's only an option if the business has an SAP strategy for which they have put in BPC. Which they put in S4. So unless you're an S4 user and there's a mixed scenario there, a lot of ECC users, certainly the more sophisticated, but the larger and more complex ones, have not been able to go on the ECC journey, the ECC to S4 journey yet, and therefore even that's not an opportunity or an option for them. But it is surprising still the number of times I have heard or SAP have said use SAC. Our IT team are evaluating SAC to do these things. Now, there are scenarios where, and certainly Insight Cubes, for example, which is an affiliated business of Concentrix, has an SAC consolidation module. It is custom solution built on a platform that is designed for analytics, not designed for consolidation, and we see that as the build option. So, back in Hyperion terms, how you would build a consolidation solution on Essbase, for example, if we go back many years, or if we're in the IBM market, we might have built a consolidation solution using their TM1 multi-dimension technologies. It's that sort of world, which is actually very infrequent now, and it's very infrequent for the very good reason that you're building what is a key statutory governance capability in an unmaintained and uncontrollable or uncontrolled environment that that yes, it has advantages over spreadsheets in terms of scalability and model rigor, but is still not supported by the vendor for that purpose. And it becomes very reliant on a very small capability that is built up within your organization to manage and maintain. Slightly better in those scenarios where we've purchased a packaged capability on top of the software, but those really are restricted, I think, in a practical sense to I'd say that mid-market, and would not want to see those kinds of capabilities in a large enterprise or a complex enterprise, because the risks then start to mount increasingly. So for an organization not who does not have an SAP strategy or an SAP ERP strategy, often that SAP route to migration from BPC to another SAP product has already been eliminated at an effective level, if not at an SAP sales level. And the SAP salespeople are obviously very keen to migrate their users onto SAC. And honestly or frankly, that is a quite scary situation. But it really comes about from the fact that SAP sales organization does not understand what BPC is, what it's for, and what it's doing. So that's our SAP option. We do, though, have and the route that the majority of organizations today who are looking at where they go from BPC, the majority of organizations are actually going out to the market and evaluating and looking at alternative options. And if we think about those alternate options, well, there's different approaches to the market. So it's are we a point solution user? So do we just use our BPC for planning, or we just use it for consolidation and nothing else? Versus we have a broad range of applications deployed in our BPC doing many things, or we've got an ambition to bring together many features of EPM into a single unified process. And we think about those scenarios, and the answer might be a different answer depending on where we are in that. But if we think about, and this is some interesting research published by BPM Partners and BARC, they published this at the start of this year based on survey work done over the prior months. BARC is a French analyst organization, BPM Partners based in the US, but we're quite often used to seeing survey work like this done with quite heavy US reliance. Actually, this is heavily weighted towards Europe in terms of these responses. But this is very specific research about what are the CPM or EPM trends and priorities in organizations. And this is from a near 1,000 organization sample. And it is interesting to see that our top items really are about data and integrating processes. We've certainly got that self-service point as an ease of use, and clearly that's never going to go away. Our ability to manage our own informational needs, our own EPM needs is always going to be a high priority. It is very, very much a business user process. But that data management point it's the first time in surveys, I think, published by BPM Partners, for example, in their Pulse surveys, which is an annual survey been running for many, many years. It's the first time that's topped the priority list. But as we look around this chart of priorities, we do see that kind of integrated. The processes between all of these analytics, planning, platform conversations are about integration. And what we're really looking at there is it's the data, and it's what we can do with the data, and it's how we can manage the data. And coming to more and more important weighted position for users. And a lot of the reason for that is simply around efficiency and need to get accuracy into data, and of course automating those things and putting in the governance and quality around that is key to that, because those processes, when they're managed well in an automated way, deliver the biggest individual process effort savings that you can see in the whole EPM kind of landscape. But also, and it does take all the way around to the 15th priority there, the AI point to raise its head. Data is essential. Good data is essential to support any of our AI processes. So we could almost be considering that some of these desires for that platform of capability that's all in one integrated or unified location, or accessible from a unified location, is laying the groundwork for where we see likely dramatic future gains in efficiency and effectiveness. Clearly, we've seen massive productivity changes in certain areas as a consequence of AI. We've not seen that yet materializing significantly in EPM, but it is almost certainly on its way. The use cases are growing daily, and the support that all of the vendors, or sorry, all of the modern vendors are putting into the AI capabilities, are going to give us more and more opportunity and advantage over time. And of course, if we can start reaping the benefits of whatever AI gives us, that allow us to make decisions better, faster, with lower effort, and that's ultimately what productivity is about, we're going to see that having that platform where we can access the right data is a key component in that. And I think some of those thoughts, those future thoughts, are actually driving part of the shift, maybe, or the re-evaluation of where things are sitting in that highest priority part of the landscape as well. So I thought I'd just finish off, like, have a kind of perspective with the market perspective with that. So obviously, talking about still that migration to an alternative solution perspective, clearly there's the SAP drivers that are forcing people away. There's those, we'll call them the hygiene factors. We must have a solution that actually works and is maintained, etc. We think about the practicalities, so we can't support it as effectively anymore. We haven't got the people, we haven't got the partners. SAP aren't being helped, and therefore, when we've got problems, there's issues. And then we think about that future potential, the missing opportunity, that technical deficit, if you like, that builds up over time and is only going to get worse for the users who remain trapped in the old landscape. And we think then about, well, what are the alternatives? And obviously, from my perspective, I've presented many of these roadmap sessions over the last several years and talked about many different solutions. Very much today, we're looking at a lot of these drivers suggesting a unified platform approach, and certainly a very strong contender in that unified platform approach to EPM is OneStream, and Concentric as a partner are very much focused on deploying OneStream based solutions and are helping a number of BPC users to migrate today. In a lot of senses, we can consider OneStream to be an actual successor to BPC. So we recognise a lot of things in OneStream as a BPC user, from the dimensional model itself and the way some of those things are managed, to that combination of business rules, support, and also that extensible logic capability that OneStream delivers across that breadth of capabilities. So in that single model, it's not a modular solution with different bits of software plugged together. It's a single model with shared dimensionality, with shared processes, with shared capabilities across all the CPM or EPM activities, even to the extent that certain things that really just are impossible in any other solutions, such as having dimension members operating at different levels for different processes. So our ability to do things like operate at a SKU level for planning, but a brand level for consolidation, for example, might be is a natural capability across a single dimension in one stream, which actually opens up huge possibilities that simplify our architecture even compared to where we would be with BPC. So we see some great things, and those things are factors of one stream being that modern latest generation platform for EPM, and I think does genuinely take the baton on from BPC. We've got some great stories that the team in Concentric can talk about in terms of BPC migrations and how that works. Supported them in a couple of webinars recently on BPC migration specifically. So if anyone's interested in that, there's a recorded webinar on the website that allows a view of that. So with all of that said, I'm going to pass on and say to Carrie any questions, and I'll try and answer as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Simon. That was really informative. We have had a couple of questions, so if I run quickly through from the top. First question is, what's the biggest risk if we delay our decision until closer to the maintenance deadline?
Well, I think there's a significant governance risk for a start, because if you go over that deadline, you're going to be operating out of maintenance software. So that would be the first question: is what does the governance in your organisation say about operating out of maintenance software? But fundamentally, you are at increasing risk of security vulnerabilities. You're at increasing risk of something going wrong that can't be addressed and having no solution at all. And we think about that in the context difference, and something in one of the underlying platforms changes, which results in something in BPC no longer working. There are limited options, because even the platforms underlying BPC in the older versions, as they go out of maintenance, are themselves out of maintenance. So we might inadvertently do an upgrade somewhere in an unrelated part of our landscape that has a knock-on effect and takes our BPC out of use, and ultimately then end up with that additional burden of having to isolate the BPC in a historical landscape that, our IT departments are going to increasingly struggle to support, because you're working in old technology that they, one, have a lot of extra cost associated with maintaining and managing, and two, are going to start lacking the skills to be able to do that anyway. So probably not the greatest risk, but a set of greatest risks.
Great, thank you. Second question, do you think SAP is likely to extend the maintenance deadlines for BPC 11?
Well, BPC 11, that's the BW4 version. I mean, BPC 11 is already out of maintenance. It's the latest release of 2021, which is coming up for end of maintenance, and then the 2025 as well. So the answer to that, certainly no for BPC 11, no for 2021, because they're connected to the platform, no for 2025, because that's connected to the HANA platform. The question really, is there going to be a 2027 whatever that allows that maintenance to continue on? I don't believe so, but there's no commitment from SAP to do that now. Historically they've been saying there isn't anymore. So I would probably say no. And actually, at a technical level, it would not be possible for SAP to extend that maintenance, because to do that they would need to extend the underlying maintenance of the BW of the HANA versions, which they are not going to do, because they will be requiring the users of HANA to be keeping up with those patch releases to stay current. So no, but possibly more releases. Unlikely though.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Third and final question. We are implementing S4, which is planned to go live at the end of this year. IT say we should use SAC, but we, brackets finance, aren't sure it will do everything we need, like the consolidation. Do we have to have group reporting as well?
Okay, I think I know who's asked this question because we had this conversation a little while ago. So the answer to that is, and I'll make it a generic answer. So if you're using BPC for consolidation, then SAC is probably not the answer, although it could be with a custom SAC consolidation solution that does exist out there. With, for example, inside cubes. The reality, though, is that's not an option for most organizations. It's relevant mid-market, I would say, only. You then think about more broadly SAC capabilities. Personally, I think SAC has some great features. It's if you were looking to do planning and analytics and that was your full scope, then yes, SAC could be the right answer. If your landscape is predominantly SAP, then yes, that is possibly a very good answer. But the reality is, as soon as you got consolidation, then you really would be looking at group reporting, and group reporting can be an expensive option. Actually, SAC can be an expensive option now. They've stopped promoting it standalone and they've bundled it into the BDC, the Business Data Cloud. So that's become an expensive option if you've got to go and acquire all of the BDC just for SAC capabilities. But group reporting, I'd say if you're doing consolidation in your BPC, group reporting is the answer, not SAC. But you need SAC as well if you go group reporting because that's where the reporting is. So yes, you potentially do, and yes, it may be a little convoluted to get to the final right answer, depending on various things.
Thank you. We have just had one more question come in. How about S4 HANA group reporting SAC? Are these not capable enough?
Well, I guess that's the same question, and the answer is it depends. Group reporting, perfectly competent consolidation solution. SAC, perfectly competent planning and analytics actually solution. And the interesting about SAC is it provides a little bit more. It's a bit more of a BI solution than most specialist planning solutions. Although we see that trend amongst the EPM solutions moving towards greater and greater analytical support. So, for instance, with OneStream, you've got the BI blend capabilities, which allow you to take data ingest data from a warehouse into unified reporting sets. But from the SAP perspective, group reporting is a very competent consolidation solution, but it is constrained. It is part of S4 HANA. It is not a standalone piece of technology. So if you have S4 HANA as your ERP, and I'll then qualify that to say if that is a single instance of S4, then yes, group reporting can be an answer. You then have to think about other factors. So things like cost, because it's not cheap if you've got a large entity base. And you only get so many entities included in your S4 license to begin with. But if you've got a two-tier, so you may have S4 HANA Cloud at center, you might have a couple of independent instances of S4 out in the business. You might still have another business on ECC. You might have some Oracle, etc., which is not an uncommon scenario. Then no, because our S4 HANA group reporting module is associated with that single instance that it's deployed in. And therefore, to ingest data from other instances requires an integration. The natural integration is you take all of your data from your other instances, you feed it through the S4, and then that feeds the group reporting. Or we have some fairly weak ingestion options that involve importing data into the group reporting independently. But yeah, so the complexity of the landscape will drive the question very much. S4 SAC is much more flexible. That's not tied to ERP. It's its own instance of its own database, and therefore it actually has reasonably strong integration capabilities. But We also, and maybe one of the things that you'd probably just challenge on SAC is SAC does not like to share its data. So it is very easy to get data into SAC, it's not so easy to get data out of it again, other than through the SAC client interface for reporting. So it's again a bit of a nuanced answer.
Lovely. Thank you, Simon. Yeah, so that's all the questions for today. Apologies for running us slightly over. If you do have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us directly on LinkedIn or by email. So yeah, thank you for joining and enjoy the rest of your day.